You are now listening to Femme Regard Podcast with Tessa Markle
and Carolina Alvarez.
Femme.
All right, welcome back, Femme, to another episode with a fantastic guest. So our guest today, I'll talk about how I heard about her, but she is like super big upcoming horror, like remember her name, guys, because she's going to blow up real soon. I'm just going to say that. I mean, she's already pretty successful, but she's definitely going to get bigger. So today we have...
Girls going places.
Sure. So today we have Chelsea Stardust. She is a director. Her first feature film, the science fiction thriller All That We Destroy, which, by the way, is going to be number one on my watch list now because I haven't watched it yet, and I'm really excited to after talking to her. But it was part of the Blumhouse series Into the Dark, which I believe is on Hulu. And her second feature, the horror comedy Satanic Panic, was produced by Fangoria and Cinestate, which are also big names, and it's super fun. I watched it. I loved it. Initially, she worked in comedy alongside legends Ivan Reitman and Judd Apatow, gaining experience on films such as Funny People and Bridesmaids. But her heart always took her back to horror, and she moved to working on the sets of several Paranormal Activity films as well as other high-profile horror films. And then she got her chance, and she's been directing ever since. So, guys, I'm really excited for you to hear her and just listen to us all nerd out about horror.
Oh yeah, guys. Like her story is just really inspiring, and she worked with these huge production companies and directors and producers, so it's so cool to see how she got started. I mean, she timing was in her favor, and it was just cool to see that she really worked it for herself and was really patient about her journey and the process, and it's just going to keep going for her. So we're really excited. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Fafalius, and I'm the producer of Krista Makes a Podcast and the host of the One Hit Thunder podcast.
And I'm Matt Kelly, host of Horror Movie Night and the producer / the head of content for the Geekscape Podcasting Network.
Between the two of us, we have, believe it or not, 25 years of podcasting experience, and we want to help you start your own podcast.
We know podcasting, and we want to share that knowledge with you.
So whether you're new to podcasting or you want some feedback on your currently active podcast, we want to help.
Or perhaps you're just overwhelmed with all of the editing work. Well, we can help you with that also.
You can contact us at info@weknowpodcasting.com for more information.
We're excited to help your podcasting dreams become a reality.
So, Femme, today we have the lovely Chelsea Stardust, who I was introduced to through my friend Ryan Larson, who is really into the horror world. And he was like, hey, I have this badass female horror director. I would love for you to get to talk to her. And so we had Chelsea on our list. We were about to reach out to her. And then I saw my other friend, Sarah Nicklin, shared something on Instagram with Chelsea. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like all my friends in horror know her. And then I realized later, I'm so bad with movie titles for whatever reason, especially in horror. I'm always like, wait, what's that one about? And then I'll tell you if I saw it. Which I had watched Satanic Panic, I think last year maybe, and loved it. And we'll get more into that a little later today. But I was like, oh, that's even better. Like I already know that I love her work. So welcome, Chelsea. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. And I love Ryan and I love Sarah. And so I love when worlds collide. So that's awesome.
Totally. That's something we're so excited about with this podcast is like that just keeps happening to us. The more people we meet, the more they know our friends already. And like, it's so cool.
Yeah.
It is. And you're like, you know what? This is a really cool hub that we have here, you know, as filmmakers. And it's cool to see everyone become fans of each other's work. Even, you know, I'm excited for our listeners who aren't like in the horror world, but are curious about it or want to produce to get to know your work. So thank you again. Like this is, it's always exciting to see everyone connect.
So Chelsea, tell us a little bit like how you even got started. I mean, we were kind of looking at your bio and like you seem to really like hit the ground running right out of the gate. But like what even led you up to that? Like, did you go to film school? What made you fall in love with all this? All that kind of background.
My journey. You want to know my journey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try to sum it up as quickly and concisely as I can. So, yeah, I've loved movies my entire life. I'm the daughter of artists. Both my parents are fine artists. And so I grew up in the art world. And I just always loved film. And my parents loved movies. We watched movies every night, and we'd have movie marathons and things like that. And they always wanted to educate me about cinema. And one of my favorite holidays is, or my favorite holiday is Halloween. And so that sort of was my intro to the scarier movies, with like Universal Monsters. And then I saw Night of the Living Dead and I fell in love. And I was like, I think I want to make movies. Like I knew at a pretty young age that that's what I wanted to do. And so, my parents were like, okay, I grew up during like with a video camera documenting my childhood, because that was, it was the 80s. Video cameras were like, people could buy them at that point. So, I grew up with one, and my dad's like, yeah, if you want to take this out and shoot some stuff with it. And that's what I did. And then in high school, I took a continuing education film class, where we shot on Super 8 and we were cutting and splicing. And yes, that,
I've always wanted to learn that.
It's
That's
awesome.
so cool. Is it really tedious though?
Not particularly. Like I loved doing it, but you kind of have to know, what you want to do. Like, I mean, you can of course undo something, but and we were doing like a lot of experimental stuff, and we were writing on film and dyeing the film and doing all sorts of crazy stuff like that. But I loved doing that. Yeah,
Wow.
it was so fun. And I still have my Super 8 camera. And then, I knew I wanted to go to film school, and I went to Ohio University, which is this, small liberal arts college in Ohio. And it was a great experience. The film program there was really small. And so, I knew I'd get access to equipment, and it was very diverse. So there's people from, all over the world who are coming to this program. And, it was such an incredible, that in itself was an education. And, I shot on Super 16 film there. So it was a lot of 16 millimeter, a little bit of digital, but that was again, like before, digital is what everyone was using. So,
Wow.
and I was such like a film purist. Like I was like, film's the way, like that's the only thing. And of course now it's like such a different world. So went through college, and I had an internship during college for Heyday Films out here in Los Angeles. So I came out for the summer because originally I was going to go to New York City, but then I came out to LA, and I was on the Warner Brothers lot because they were making the Harry Potter movies at the time, the company I was working for. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like it's beautiful here. Of course, when you're on the lot, it's like everything is happening,
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, I think I want to come to California. So I went back to school, did my senior thesis film. And after I graduated, like literally graduated, like walked across the stage, packed up my house at college, came back home, and I got a call from the woman I worked for at Heyday. And she was like, hey, I moved companies. Are you still moving out here? Because I need a new assistant. And I was like, I'll be there in 5 days. So I literally like packed up my life and got a car that was like my graduation present, and packed up my life and drove across the country and started working for her like immediately. So, and she had moved companies. So she was at Montecito Picture Company, which is Ivan Reitman's company. So you're talking Ghostbusters and Stripes and old school, like legit old school comedy. So that was, and I had never been an assistant before. I was in film school to like learning about like how to shoot, how to light, loading cameras, all that stuff, like how to direct, editing. But then to do an assistant job, like they don't teach you that stuff in film school. They don't teach you how to do that. Like
Right.
at that point, I don't even think we were taught like what the Hollywood Reporter was or Variety or anything like that. So or what the, big agencies were or who was running those agencies. So it was definitely a learning curve, but she was so lovely and so patient with me and just like believed in me, and which was incredible. And so I worked there for 2 years, and I was in the comedy world. And then I had an opportunity to interview to be Judd Apatow's assistant. Did that, got that
Holy
job.
shit.
So I was one of 4 assistants for Judd, but that was during, so I was on set for Get Him to the Greek and Funny People and Bridesmaids. So I was with him during that time. But like comedy, my heart wasn't really in it. He knew my heart wasn't really in it. And so I was like, God, I don't know how to get into the horror world because I started in comedy. And they were like, yeah, we don't know anyone in that world. We don't know anything about those movies, but good luck to you. So, and so I was just, it was the, you know, I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out what to do next. And an assistant friend, she was like, hey, there's this guy who's looking for an assistant. He's promoting his assistant. So, you know, he needs someone to replace her. His name is Jason Blum. And I looked him up and he had 2 credits at that time. Like it was The Reader and Paranormal Activity. And I was like, oh, I saw Paranormal Activity. I liked that. And I think that had come out just like a couple of years before this. So we're in like, this is 2010. So she's like, you should interview. So I applied. And of course, when people see like Ivan Reitman or Judd Apatow on a resume, they're like, oh, maybe we should bring this person in. And so I met with his assistant. I met with him, immediately hit it off because he loves Hitchcock, as do I. I have a Hitchcock tattoo. So we had something to kind of like start, you know, conversation starter. And, you know, he's like, all right, you're hired. And so I started in January of 2011 working as his assistant, and Insidious came out that April, and then everything started to change. So I watched it become like the sort of empire it is now. And I left, I told him, I'm like, listen, I want to be a director. I don't want to get promoted in this company unless you're going to have me direct a movie. Like, I don't want to be a creative executive. I don't want to do any of that stuff. So I will be your assistant until I'm ready to take the leap to directing. So I was always like really clear with him up front about my path, my trajectory. And he was like, okay, great. So cut to 4 years later. I ended up.
Which I love that you did that. I think that's like really, I mean, people sometimes are scared to speak up about what they really want or the path they want to take because they're fearful of ruining an opportunity at starting at a company like that's very like prestigious, or, you know, like whoever your employer is, you're like, I don't want to upset them or get them to like not give me this chance. So like what, like, was that just something you made a decision to yourself before, you know, starting with this company that I'm just going to be very clear and I'm going to just say what I want and go for it?
And I didn't
like, is that just what you just made that a priority?
Yeah, I didn't want to
in that sense because that's it's scary.
No,
to
totally.
do.
It is. But I didn't want to ever be sort of misleading in the sense of like, if it came time for me to get promoted, to then turn that down would feel not good. So instead I wanted to be clear about like, listen, here's what I know you need from me, like to organize your entire life and basically run your life for you. In return, like I was like, I need to be able to go to set like on the weekends and, you know, when night shoots, I want to be allowed to do that. And you know, introduced me to the directors, you know, which obviously I'm like scheduling stuff with them. And, you know, it was I was there at such an early time that now it's like, I have like Lee Winnell as a mentor and Chris Landon as a mentor and James Wan as a mentor and Adam Robitel as a mentor. So I'm like, so thankful that I had that experience because that helped me, and to be on set for, I mean, almost every movie that was made in LA in those like 4 years I was on set for it at some point or another. So, and, you know, I wanted to be clear of like, I don't want to be a producer. I want to be a director, and to just try to absorb as much as I could while I was there, like the notes process and the studio system and like all that stuff. So, you know, it was, I just felt it was the right thing to do. And he and I had such a good relationship that I was always really clear with him about that stuff. So, but then, you know, it got to a point where I was like, I think it's time. Like, it's been 4 years. Whiplash was about to go to the Oscars. And also he had some stuff changing in his life. He was about to have kids. And I was like, I know things are going to change drastically when that happens. And I decided, I was like, this feels like the right time for me to move on. So he said, absolutely, I support you. And he's like, you should go direct some short films for Crypt TV, because Crypt was just starting then, and I hadn't directed anything since college. So it was like, I was like, fuck this. It's like, what has it been? It was like 10 years or something had gone by at this point, 7 or 8 years maybe. And I was like, that's a long time. I need to show that I'm still like a competent director this many years later. And after all, years and years, like 8 years of learning from all different people. And so he's like, let me, put a call in and put you on their radar. And that's what he did. And I left the company. It was like he ended up calling me a couple times after that to see if I would come back. It's like, can you come back? Like, and I had to explain, I was like, no assistant is going to be as good as me, because, and not to like be pretentious about it, but it's true, because I was there while I grew with the company, but to thrust someone into that hadn't been with them or no, like I knew him like as well as he knew himself probably. So I was like, no one's going to have that kind of like know everything about you right at the start. So you just have to give someone time to get to know you and the company, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
So, but he's like, I know. I just really wish you would come back. And I said, maybe one day I will. Aww. And, but I ended up doing, I did 7 short films. Almost all of them were for Crypt TV, which was really great to be able to exercise those muscles again, kind of form a crew that I worked really well with. And meanwhile, while I'm shooting all these short films, I'm also assisting directors, because you can't survive on making short films. So I assisted a TV director and a commercial director. And then I assisted Adam Robitel on Insidious 4. So I ended up coming back into the Blumhouse family, because I was like, hadn't done anything in TV. So I wanted to know about that. Hadn't done anything in the commercial world. Wanted to know about that. And then working with Adam on Insidious, The Last Key was one of the best experiences of my life, because I was able to shadow him. So I was by his side the whole time. And, he would ask me, my opinions on things and scenes. And I was able to just watch him work and listen to him kind of talk to his actors and his crew. And that experience, I'm like so thankful for and so grateful for, because that taught me so much. And then I was sending like scripts to Blumhouse that I was attached to be like, how about this one? Do you want to make this one? What about this one? What about this one? And so finally, I think it was like the 10th thing I had sent them, which was All That We Destroy. And they're like, this is the movie we want to make with you. And so I got to make my first movie with my alma mater, with Blumhouse. And I sort of was able to transition from being seen as an assistant to being seen as a director, as a creative. And I think that it's really difficult to do, because a lot of times, people will be an assistant for someone and they'll think of them as disposable, and they will maybe not pay attention to what that person wants to do with their life. And, maybe we'll be like, you're an assistant to me, and that's all I see you as. So for them to think of me as something other than that, and then to say, here's money, we trust you, go make a movie, was a big deal. And then, it became part of Into the Dark. It was the Mother's Day sequence, or Mother's Day segment, which of course was perfect for what that movie is about. And, keep in mind, it's taken me, like, at this point, I've been working for 10 years trying, like, since I came to LA, trying to get a movie made, which took, it's a long time to like patiently wait, quote unquote, wait your turn, while you're fighting to get something made. And then it happened, like we shot it, this is 2021. We shot it in 2018. Yeah. 2018. And actually, I think what's today? Tomorrow will be, the anniversary of when we wrapped that movie.
Oh, wow.
Like this February 17th, 2018 was I think our last day of shooting. So I shot that, and then I was in post, and then I got Satanic Panic. And then I shot that in like September, October, or maybe it was October, November of 2018 as well. And then they both came out in 2019. So I was like posting them simultaneously. Like one came out on Hulu at the beginning of May 2019. The other premiered at Overlook at the end of May in 2019. It was like those 2 years of my life were so insane.
I bet.
That it was just like I was, doing promo for Destroy. And then, Satanic Panic was in like 20 festivals or more. So I was doing a festival run for that. And then it came out on Shudder and the Blu-ray and all that, and VHS and vinyl and all that stuff. And then right as everything wrapped up, like finished, fully done, like your work's not done until that DVD is like on the shelf. And then the pandemic hit in 2020, and then, I'm thankful that I got all that stuff done beforehand, because I know a lot of people had to release films during a pandemic and that was not easy, but, and then here we are in 2021 and I'm getting ready to shoot my next movie. So that's the journey.
I feel like your timing has just been like impeccable. And, maybe half of it is luck, but like, because you got in like with Jason Blum, like before he blew up, you got to learn and like follow him with that. I mean, even before that with like Judd Apatow and all of that, like you just really got to work with some amazing people, like because you had the chance to, because of the timing with it, and then, you say like, well, 10 years is a really long time to finally get your movie made, but everybody else is out there like making their first feature and it's not going anywhere except maybe some festivals. And you ended up being able to, make your first feature with Blumhouse or, distribute it through Blumhouse and everything. So it just, like the timing has been working out amazing. And then to get all of that done and wrapped like right before the pandemic is like, yeah, exactly. I was just going to do that same, like wipe your brow. Ooh. Yeah.
Race against time. Yeah. I'm so thankful for all of that. And that's the other thing is it's like, I was sort of nervous with All That We Destroy, because I was like, man, if this is an indie movie, if this comes out theatrically and doesn't make any money, I'll be seen as like a box office failure. And it's, especially as a woman, everyone's like always paying attention to that stuff. Right. And, you're not as, they don't give us second chances as often. But I was so thankful it came out on a streaming platform, because I was like, well, there's no box office numbers that they can say, well, no, it's like, and it did, got a lot of tons of buzz on Hulu, which was really great. And so I'm really thankful about that. So it's like, okay, relieved. Like,
yeah, that's perfect.
What do you think kept you going, or I guess just like the patience for through that 10-year decade before you could finally like direct something that was really yours? Like, was it just the learning aspect, like really just enjoying that and knowing, what, I will have my time? Like, what really kept you going through all that time and not specifically directing?
Yeah, I want to say I just felt like I had more to learn. I was just like, I still want to make sure I kind of have this knowledge and this knowledge and this knowledge. And I wanted to just keep learning from all different directors. And, so then I kind of felt, and also, I don't come from money. Like I don't come from money at all. So I couldn't just not have a job and just go write something or go direct something. Like I had to be working a day job constantly. So quitting Blumhouse was so scary. But I had saved money because I knew I'd be leaving eventually. And then I ended up having to keep working, assisting directors, but I was also clear with them, this is going to be short term. Like, I'm not going to be your assistant for like 4 years. I'm going to be your assistant for this one project, like temporarily. And of course, like, they would then say, well, why don't you stay longer? And I was like, I can't, I got to make my movies. I have to like, and I just kept pushing forward. But that's sort of the thing where I was like, I just need to keep learning. And then I got to a point, like after I was on Insidious 4 from basically start to finish, I was like, okay, I've been on a production, seen it all the way through with the director, like by their side. Now I feel like I can go do this. Like after watching Adam, I was like, okay, that kind of gave me the confidence I needed to go off and do it. And also having done the short films, learning from the short films too, of like, oh yeah, there's this thing and that thing and this thing. And you're still always learning. Like there's still some things I don't, know very well because I haven't had the opportunity to work with them a lot. Like VFX is still something I'm learning because I haven't used a lot of VFX yet. So, and that's something that is exciting to me. So, you're always learning as a filmmaker, you're always kind of adjusting, I think. And, so that's, and a lot of patience.
Definitely. I love too that you know, made it a point to, like, yes, you started in comedy and you knew that wasn't really your thing. So then you moved to horror because you got that opportunity. But then, like, after that, you know, assisting, you said TV and commercial directors and, you know, all that stuff, like, you did make it a point to get to see all those different worlds. So you knew, you know, what their styles were and what the expectations were and everything. Because, you know, even if you know that you want to make horror features and that's your thing, like, it's good to know what everybody else is doing and what the expectations are everywhere else, because, you know, so you get an opportunity for a horror series and it's like, oh, I had this idea for a feature, but maybe I can turn it into a series. And, you know, so it's just really good to have that whole knowledge base, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And I'm sure there's humor in horror too, right? So it's just like, I think, fun to also, you know, play with that.
Girl, have you listened to Hags yet?
Oh my God, yes. Let's tell the fam about it.
So, Hags is a weekly podcast dedicated to deconstructing and demystifying how society values gender by asking key questions like, for the love of God, why?
Yep. And each episode begins by celebrating a boss-ass bitch from throughout history before tackling our ever-changing understanding of modern intersectional feminism through history, pop culture, current events, personal anecdotes, and embarrassing childhood stories.
Co-hosts Riley Rose Critchlow and Nicole Weiland are frequently joined by special guests like Gates McFadden, Troyan Belisario, Gina Susanna, Liz Jenkins, Brianna Cuoco, Ione Butler, Jazz Thornton, and Jen Mora from Voices of Hope, and many more.
The show is produced by Alex Reeves and Point of Blue Studios.
Follow them across the social medias at Hags Podcast for more.
I haven't seen your films yet, so like talk to us a little bit about your style and like what is it that what segment of horror do you really go for? Because there's a lot of little subgenres.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I am such a fan of the genre, so I'm a fan of pretty much like almost every subgenre. I've, you know, seen a ton of horror films. I love them. They're sort of my comfort. But in terms of like me personally, like all horror films just inspire me, and when I'm sort of in a creative lull, I'll put one on and be like, oh yeah, right, this is why I love doing what I do. So yeah, from like it's all about the material. It all comes down to the script. It's just, that's sort of how it all starts. And just with All That We Destroy, which is a science fiction thriller, I guess I'll say, so it falls into more science fiction, I think. That was written for me, that script. The writer specifically wrote it for me to direct. And what I loved about it is that it's a little bit of, we need to talk about Kevin. It's a little bit of Black Mirror. It's a little bit of Psycho, you know, so thinking about all those references. Yeah. And it's a little ex machina too. So I helped develop the script, and the thing I sort of look for, like pretty much everything I'm making, is I want to pay attention to the female characters in the film. That's what I'm always looking for, is how women are represented within the script. And that's sort of my thing that I look for, quote unquote. And so I thought it was so fascinating that this story was about how far a mother would go to protect her son. So the fact that, she walks in on her son killing a girl, and instead of, saying, I need to do the right thing, like, this isn't okay. Instead, she clones the girl over and over again for her son to kill as a form of therapy. So instead of like maybe sending him, getting him therapy, instead she's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this, I want it to be controlled, and you can always come home and do this, but maybe you can have a life if it's like, so, and I'm not going to,
it's her motherly like instincts to like want to protect her child and like accept him.
Totally. And like,
yeah, definitely like those psycho.
And how far she'll go. Yeah. And so, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there were movies, I thought about like Poltergeist and The Exorcist and Cujo. And you don't always think about, in Poltergeist, Diane Freeling goes to another dimension to save her daughter. In The Exorcist, she's willing to entertain the idea of an exorcism to save her daughter. And then in Cujo, she's fighting a killer dog to save her child. So it's like, I always thought that was really fascinating. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. And like, you know, when you see the movie, the conversation that I always bring up is nature versus nurture, which makes sense when you see it. So, you know, so that's what I loved about that. And then in terms of Satanic Panic, which couldn't be more different from All That We Destroy, which is a horror comedy. Like, speaking of, I mean, horror and comedy do go hand in hand. There's a reason, like, when you go see a horror movie and you scream at something, that you laugh immediately after. Like, it's such a release. And for me, it's like cathartic. Like, I find horror to be very cathartic, and it's the best.
I love it. I love a good scream. Like, get something to jump out at me. I hate it, but I love it. It is so fun.
And so I wanted to do something like I loved Grady's script. Like, Grady Hendrix wrote that. I was the director for hire for that movie. And so, you know, I had notes on the script, and I'm such a fan of Grady. So, you know, when and horror comedy is also very difficult. Like, tonally, it's so hard. But I had great actors who were able to execute it perfectly. But it's also, you know, horror comedy, it can be a little bit polarizing. It's not for everybody. So not everyone likes horror comedies. So that's something you always have to like keep in mind. But horror has it has a built-in audience. Like, there are horror fans that will watch every single horror movie that comes out. Like, your movie will become someone's favorite movie, which is like something really cool to think about. And I had people coming up to me saying, like, a lot of women coming up to me saying, you inspired me to be a filmmaker, or like hearing that stuff, like when you're at a festival and someone coming up and be like, I think I want to direct, like, I want to do what you do, is like the most validating, amazing thing to hear. And especially from young women too. And so it's like, really magical. And, you know, that's Satanic Panic's my slumber party movie. Like, I want people to watch it, like, when, you know, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds having a slumber party to watch that movie, and maybe it inspires them to pursue filmmaking. So, you know, they're both very different movies. And then my next film is a really dark comedy, with some like horror elements to it. But I'm always like exploring different, when you talked about subgenres, like, I'm always exploring different subgenres. You know, and then there's stuff that I'm attached to a bunch of projects, and I love slasher films, and I love, you know, the science fiction stuff, and I love creature features, and I love holiday horror. And, you know, there's so many. I really would love to make a witch movie, because there's only one witch movie that's directed by a woman. They're all directed by men, which I think is very interesting. But, you know, so there's I want to keep exploring the genre, but also there's things outside of horror that I want to do as well. So, but that's sort of, you know, the genre I gravitate towards. And there's, again, like, it's the only genre that has a fan base that's like a built-in fan base, that there are conventions in almost every state dedicated to horror. You don't see, like, you know, the North Carolina drama film festival necessarily. It's like always the horror gets, and science fiction, like there's more festivals for that genre than anything else. So being able to really interact with the fans is great and really special, because what would we be without them? So
yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit. Just the horror genre, like, I've always been a fan of horror, like every kind of horror. But I didn't really learn about, like, I don't even know how I want to say this, the community of it and the history of it and all that kind of stuff, until like coming out here and becoming a filmmaker myself. And it's like the horror community, especially out here in LA, is like so tight. Like, so many people know each other, and you see like the same actors over and over again, and like, you know, whatever level of like tier of horror film and whatever. But it's so interesting to hear people's conversations about the subgenres of horror too. And like, his horror it tends to like separate itself or get separated from like every other genre of movie, right? Like, when people say genre movies, they usually mean like horror. And it's like, it's just weird that it's so like separate from everything else in my mind. But yeah, there are so many different kinds of subgenres of horror. It's kind of crazy. And I just kind of laugh when people are so like elitist about separating all of those too, you know, like Carolina and I are writing what I would call a thriller right now, but when we were still coming up with the idea for it, and by us writing, I really mean she's writing it, but I'm helping her with the creation of it. But, you know, we were
Couldn't do it without you, Tess. My backboard. You need one.
Like we were saying, like, well, does this fall into like almost sci-fi, or would it be kind of a horror because of the psychological element of it? And it's almost like it doesn't really matter, as long as you can throw it somewhat in like a thriller or horror, vein. But that's just always interesting to me how people are so like exact about separating it all out, which also brings me to like comedy horror, like campy horror and stuff like that. Like, I know me personally, like when I was younger, I didn't really get it. Like, I just thought they were like bad.
Yeah.
I mean? But now I love a good campy horror. And like, even, like American Horror Story, I usually like the seasons that nobody else does because I'm like, these are so clever. Like, how are people not getting that he's making fun of himself? And,
Yeah.
So, I just think like comedy horror is such a fun genre, and I think it gets misunderstood a lot. But I love that, like, Satanic Panic. I mean, 5 minutes in, I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay. All right. This is fun, So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, it's always an interesting conversation when, how people kind of react to genre stuff, or they're very specific about it. And yes, I always what I get sort of annoyed about is when someone's like, oh, I don't like horror movies. Like that is one of my biggest pet peeves. He's like, oh, I don't watch those movies. And then I'm like, did you see The Exorcist? Did you see The Shining? Did you see The Fly? Did you see Poltergeist? And of course, like 90% of the time they're like, oh yeah, love that movie. Or like Alien or whatever. They're like, oh, I love that movie.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, those are fucking horror movies, yo. Like, so it's just, and I was like, how can you be so close-minded? Like, how can you be like a fan of cinema or a filmmaker and be completely disregard an entire genre of cinema that probably has more to say than like 80% of the rest of cinema? You know what I mean? Like horror, there's so much that people are saying in horror movies, and to just disregard that, I think is foolish and incredibly close-minded. And I was like, how can you be a true creative if you're not open to all genres of cinema? So that's why I think it's important to be like cinematically educated. And so, but it is an interesting conversation. And yes, like you were saying, horror comedy is sort of trickier, but I do think that it is, I guess, like can be more accessible, because I had a lot of people with Satanic Panic coming up to me saying like, I don't really check out horror movies, but this I really liked. And now I want to check out more movies like this. So I think it's sort of like for people that are a little bit nervous about the genre, I think it's a good stepping stone of like, okay, here's some you can see that you will probably really enjoy that aren't gonna, that aren't like Inside or something, that aren't gonna like totally like destroy you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like not all of them are for like, there's some subgenres that I don't always want to watch, but it's like, you find the ones that you like, and those are the ones that you like. And so, you like what you like.
Yeah. Okay, this might be a really hard question, but you can have the same answer for both of these, or they can be different. What is your favorite horror movie, and what has like left the biggest impact on you, whether that's like your work or just you as a person?
Oh God, that's such a hard question. So my favorite changes.
She beat me to it.
So my favorite horror movie that changes a lot. Like I kind of toggle back and forth between a couple, but I will say like the movie that really sort of, when I discovered it, I was like, oh, this movie is incredible. This is what I think I want to do with my life, was Night of the Living Dead. The original George Romero Night of the Living Dead also left a huge impact on me. Like the ending destroyed me. And I was like, wait a minute, we've been on this journey with Barbara and with Ben, and both of them die. Like I was so devastated at Ben's death at the end that it just destroyed me. And so, and I've gone on and sort of, I've written about Night of the Living Dead and what it means to me as a filmmaker. But, when I realized, I was like, oh, horror movies can do this, like, that's incredible. So, and then in terms of like inspired my work, it's kind of different depending on what I'm working on. So with All That We Destroy, it was very much like, the movies I mentioned all of those were sort of big touchdowns. Psycho, I'm a huge Hitchcock fan. So Psycho was sort of the big inspiration for that in a way. And then for Satanic Panic, talking about, a lot of times people don't talk about modern horror. Usually it's stuff in the 60s, 70s, 80s that people are referencing. But Jennifer's Body was probably the biggest inspiration for Satanic Panic. I love that movie. I think it's so underrated and so incredible, and is finally getting like the love it deserves, though it's, years later.
Right.
But, I think there's a lot of movies that we sort of reevaluate later down the road. And that,
especially with horror, I think.
Totally. And so, but there's so many that I love. I also love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love Near Dark. I'm a huge Catherine Bigelow fan. So, but the list goes on and on. But in terms of like my work specifically, like that's the one. And then for my next movie, I guess I'll say the big inspiration is The Bad Seed for that one.
Okay.
So.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see this next film. I know it's probably tough right now because of the pandemic and everything, but do you have an ideal like date of when you'd like to be releasing that?
So we're talking about, like, again, pandemic pending, like hoping maybe shooting in the summer, maybe June or July will be possible. Like we're casting, and I actually finished shot listing because I was like, I have time. Why not? But yeah, so we'll just kind of have to see, like, if we're able to shoot in the summer, then I'll be posting the entire rest of the year. So it'll be a 2022 release. But we'll see. It just depends on like where it ends up going. If it ends up being like a festival movie, or if it ends up on Netflix, or like, we guess just kind of have to wait and see. But, I love working with writers. I love the writer of the script, and I write occasionally, but I'm primarily direct. So working with writers is just one of my favorite things. And because writing, I think is so, it's so difficult. Like, it's so hard. I have so much respect for writers. My partner is a writer, and he was one of the writers of All That We Destroy. And so it's helpful to have a writer as your partner that you live with.
Yeah.
But it's and I think they're incredibly underrated, at least in the feature world. Like, I want writers. I want my writer. I don't own them. I want the writer on set with me by my side, talking about scenes, especially if stuff has to get adjusted or whatnot. And and it's funny because in TV, the writer is king. So it's so interesting that TV versus features, how writers are sort of treated. And I was like, listen, we would have nothing without the writer. Like, it all starts with the story. So, and I love to be the sort of vessel to bring that story to life, to help bring it to life. So I was like, it should be a collaboration. Like, I'm all about collaborating, and also with your actors and your department heads. And, making a film isn't about me, it's about us. It's like, what can we all do together? So it's definitely we instead of me, for me personally, process.
Yeah. And I think that's why, people speak so highly of you, because that's a very admirable quality to have. And it's clearly like gets you good results,
I like to think so.
Do you think that there's not been a female like slasher film where she is like the one leading all the killings? The genre much more extensive than I do. So that's just something I thought of before. And I'm just curious if you feel like you haven't seen that either. Or is there a film to
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's definitely, the ratio is definitely off. I mean, even though it's more of a because she's a creature, you could argue Jennifer's Body, because she's sort of killing people. But I mean, the first Friday the 13th is Mrs. Voorhees. It's not Jason. Jason doesn't start killing until the second Friday the 13th. So she's sort of regarded as a female slasher. But that is something that, and we've seen it, here and there in a couple of films. But, not nearly as much as I'd want to see. So I think people are I think we're getting there. I think, I would love to see more, because like you were saying, it's the slashers you see on t-shirts are primarily men, whereas the final girls are primarily female. So hence Final Girls. So
exactly.
There's a couple final boys out there, but so it's something that I think is still being kind of explored. I mean, you can't really argue that Freaky is, because it's technically a man in a woman's body, because it's a body swap, but it does look like it's Catherine Newton, like going around like killing people. So, but I think I think it's when it comes to like, I guess not really straight slashers, because like Jennifer's Body also like ginger snaps, but she's a werewolf. So I think we're touching on it, but I think we're getting close to having that like happen to like that, to get that iconic.
Yeah, I think so too. But I was like, I don't think it's quite the iconic thing hasn't been made yet.
There's only a handful
So,
that
I don't know,
are
maybe we'll
referenced. Like again, what did I list like 3 of them? So I think, and I know there's a couple that just aren't coming to me at this moment, but I think because otherwise you think of like movies like Basic Instinct or Fatal Attraction or Hand That Rocks the Cradle or Single White Female or like those ones. But in terms of like horror, I think it's there. I think more are coming. I think we just have to be patient, because I think they're coming. I know that they're on their way.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that people like are more aware that it's missing and are craving it now than they ever were before. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. One more question along those lines too. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't seen that you've been wanting to see in the horror genre? Like any sort of character or scenario or anything that you're just craving to see somebody create?
Yeah. Obviously like what we were talking about, more female slashers, also more, like we mentioned about witch movies. I would love to see some more witch movies directed by women. I think there's The Love Witch, which is a very different kind of film. But I want to see a fucking scary witch movie directed by a woman. Why haven't we seen that? So, that's something I'm really craving. And I always get like a bee in my bonnet about that. Anytime I see a commercial for another witch movie, I was like, directed by a dude. What the fuck? Like, which is great. Like, good for them to be able to make those movies. But that's something I want to see. And, and obviously like more LGBTQ representation and really kind of taking what we know as the final girl and let's experiment with that a little bit. So, we think a little, and anything that's outside the box, I'm all about and all for, because the horror genre is the genre to experiment. And that's really exciting to me. And every day we're seeing like incredible horror movies and women making incredible horror movies. That's like really exciting to me. So I'm excited to see what's to come, next year and this year. And, I'm excited. So we'll see.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned too, that's like the genre to experiment in. And you would mention The Love Witch, which I just watched recently too, which is like the weirdest movie. I still don't even know if I like it or not. But like, I love though that she like really just experimented with like the look and the style of it so much, even more than like the content. Because to me, I was like, wait, when was this made? And I was like, I thought it was made in like the 60s or something, and it's so cool. Femme, if you haven't seen it, watch it. Again, I don't even know if I like it, but I'm so glad that I've at least seen it. It was really cool. And I love that. Yeah, it's a space to experiment with because, like we mentioned before, there's so many subgenres and there's just so much you can do with it and try.
Yeah. And The Love Witch, I think is an incredibly brave movie. Because I think just taking on basically how do you modernize like the Velvet Vampire or whatever, like how do you do that in, the 2000s. So I think she was, when you know what that movie's referencing, she fucking nailed it. Like Anna Biller just totally nailed it. So I'm excited to see what she does next. But yeah, I thought that movie was like such a brave undertaking.
Yeah, for sure. Because she did like everything with it too, didn't she? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I mean, this conversation, I could talk about horror for hours. So I'm really excited that we got to have you on. Exactly.
It just goes,
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's just so many like things you could talk about. But
and I know I'm forgetting like a ton of movies that I'm sure people are gonna be like, wait a minute, what about this one? Like, yes, right. All those ones you're suggesting. Yes. Those two.
Yeah. But I'm so glad we got to have you on today. Thank you so much for chatting with us. I'm super excited for your next movie coming out, whenever that may be. Keep my eyes open. But yeah, I'm really glad we got to talk to you and hear how you got your start and what inspires you and what keeps you going.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you both.
Thanks for listening to Femme Regard Podcast. If you like what you hear, tune in every Friday for more tips on the filmmaking business and insightful conversations with industry professionals.
We can only grow with your support, so please subscribe, share, rate, and review. You can also join the Femme Fam on Patreon. For more on us, check us out at femregard.com.